In the small town of Ijora, the sun burned softly over the busy market streets. The air was filled with the smell of roasted corn, spices, and the sound of traders calling out their prices. Among them worked Adana, a quiet woman known for her steady hands and kind heart. She had been a tailor since she was a child, stitching clothes for people who could not afford the big city shops. Her small stall sat beneath a wide mango tree, where she often smiled and greeted everyone who passed. That day began like any other. She set her cloth pieces neatly, fixed her old sewing machine and began to work. But just as she was threading a needle, a loud scream broke through the noise. A woman shouted, "My bag! My bag is gone." It was the mayor's wife, dressed in fine lace and gold jewelry. People turned their heads, running toward her as she cried for help. In the confusion, a man in a brown shirt dashed through the crowd. He held a small black bag close to his chest. The crowd shouted, "Thief! Thief!" but no one caught him. He disappeared into the narrow street behind the yam sellers. The market was full of chaos. People argued, pointed fingers and searched for answers. Adana stood quietly, holding her sewing basket, confused and scared. The police arrived soon after, blowing whistles and shouting for order. They questioned everyone, looking for witnesses. But all the noise and panic made it hard to tell what had really happened. One tall officer, with a hard face and dark sunglasses, stopped in front of Adana. He looked at her basket, then at her face. "You were standing close to the mayor's wife," he said. "Did you see the thief?" Adana shook her head. "No, sir. I was just sewing. I didn't see who took it." The officer narrowed his eyes. "You didn't see, or you don't want to say?" "I swear, sir," Adana said softly. "I only came to sell clothes." But the officer didn't believe her. He pointed to the sewing basket. "Open it." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were folded pieces of cloth, a small pair of scissors, thread, and a few coins from her morning sales. The officer poked through them, then sighed. "Still," he said, "you were too close to the scene. We'll have to ask you some questions at the station." The crowd began to whisper. Some people who had once bought her clothes now stared at her with suspicion. "Could it be her?" one woman murmured. "She's always so quiet, maybe that's how she hides things." Adana's heart sank. She tried to explain, but the officers didn't listen. They led her away, her small basket still in her hands. As she walked past the market, people moved aside, whispering behind her back. Some felt pity, others curiosity, but no one spoke up for her. At the police station, the officers made her sit on a wooden bench. The walls were covered in old posters, and the air smelled of dust and sweat. Adana kept her eyes low, afraid to look at anyone. She had never been in a police station before. She had only seen such places in stories, dark rooms where truth was often buried under power. One officer began writing in a notebook. "Name?" "Adana," she said quietly. "Occupation?" "Tailor." He nodded slowly. "Do you know the mayor's wife?" "No, sir. I only see her at the market sometimes." "Do you know the man who ran away?" "No, sir. I didn't see his face." The officer leaned back in his chair. "Convenient," he muttered. "You were right there, but you saw nothing." Adana bit her lip, fighting back tears. "Please, sir, I did nothing wrong. I don't even know why I'm here." But her words fell like feathers in a storm, light and unheard. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the streets gold. Inside the small station, Adana sat in silence, her mind racing. She thought of her small stall, her unfinished work, her customers who would come tomorrow and find her gone. Her thoughts turned to her late mother, who used to tell her, "Truth may sleep, but it never dies." She repeated those words softly to herself, trying to find courage. In another room, the police discussed her case. One of them said, "She's just a tailor. But thieves can be clever. Maybe she worked with someone." Another shrugged. "Maybe. But we have no proof yet." Still, no one searched for the man in the brown shirt. No one checked the back alleys or asked the fruit sellers what they saw. Their eyes had stopped at the easiest suspect, the quiet woman with a sewing basket. Hours passed. Night fell. The lights flickered in the station, and the sound of crickets filled the air outside. Adana sat there, still in her same seat, her back aching, her eyes tired but clear. She thought about how quickly the world could turn on a person. How one moment of bad luck could erase a lifetime of goodness. Finally, a young constable walked by. He looked at her, tired, gentle, confused. He asked softly, "Did you really not see anything?" Adana looked up at him. Her voice was calm. "I saw confusion, fear, and judgment. But the face of the thief? No. Only the color of his shirt, brown. The constable nodded slowly, thinking. But before he could say more, another officer called him away. Adana was left alone again, surrounded by silence and doubt. As the night grew colder, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. If I must prove my truth, let truth find me. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the noise of cars and the hum of the city, a man in a brown shirt walked alone through the dark, holding a black bag tightly under his arm. The real story was still unfolding. But for now the police only saw what was easy to see. And Adana, the quiet tailor of Ijora, waited in that dim station, not knowing that soon her calm eyes would reveal what 20 others had missed. The air inside the police station was heavy and still. The small fan on the ceiling spun slowly, creaking with every turn. Adana sat on a rough wooden bench, her wrists resting on her lap, her sewing basket beside her. The smell of old paper, sweat, and dust filled the room. She could hear the muffled laughter of officers behind a half-closed door, the clatter of metal cups, and the hum of voices talking about everything except justice. "She looks too calm," said one of the policemen, his voice low but sharp. "That's how clever thieves behave. They pretend to be innocent." Adana didn't respond. She had already learned that silence sometimes spoke louder than defense. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, noticing every small thing: the peeling paint on the wall, the old clock that had stopped ticking, the cobwebs in the corner, and the way sunlight tried to squeeze through the dirty window glass. She could hear the town outside, the distant horns, the cries of sellers packing up their goods, and the rhythm of footsteps on the dusty road. She missed her small sewing stall already. Her mind went to her customers, the women who smiled when they picked up their neatly sewn dresses, and the children who laughed as she measured them for new clothes. Now she sat here treated like a criminal. The officer behind the desk leaned forward. "Tell us again," he said, tapping his pen on the table. "You didn't see anything?" "I didn't," she said softly. "But the thief wore a brown shirt. That's all I remember." He frowned. "Brown shirt? Half the men in Ijora wear brown shirts." "Yes," she said. "But the one I saw, he ran toward the yam seller's lane. No one chased him." The officer smirked. "And you expect us to believe that? You probably helped him escape." Adana lowered her gaze. She could feel the heat of anger rising inside her chest, but she pressed it down. Her mother's words echoed again in her mind: "Patience is the friend of truth." Hours passed. The officers continued talking among themselves, sometimes laughing, sometimes arguing. Adana stayed still, her eyes fixed on the small window across the room. The window faced the market road, the same road where she had spent most of her days stitching hope into fabric. The sky outside had turned orange, then purple. Night was approaching. The last few sellers were packing up their stalls, calling to each other as they left. A group of children ran past, chasing a ball made of old cloth. Adana's tired eyes followed them, and then she froze. A man ran by the window, his face half hidden by the fading light. He wore a brown shirt. In his hand was a small black bag, the same kind the mayor's wife had lost. Her breath caught. She stood up quickly. "The thief is outside," she said, her voice urgent but calm. The officers turned to her, surprised. "What did you say?" one asked. "I just saw him," she said. "The man in the brown shirt, he ran past the window. He's holding the bag." For a moment there was silence. Then the oldest officer laughed. "Now you're trying to be a detective?" The others joined in, shaking their heads. One of them said, "You've been sitting here too long. Maybe the heat is playing with your mind." Adana didn't argue. She looked back at the window again, but the man was gone. Her heart pounded. She knew what she saw, the same brown shirt, the same quick, guilty run. But the police had already gone back to their chatter, not even glancing outside. She sat back down slowly, her hands trembling slightly. How can people be so blind when the truth is right in front of them? She thought. Minutes passed like hours. The light outside faded completely and the night crept in. Through the window she could now see only the soft glow of lanterns from the market road. Somewhere far away, a dog barked and the crickets began their steady song. An officer walked by with a cup of tea. "You should get some rest," he said mockingly. "Tomorrow maybe you'll confess." Adana looked at him but said nothing. She wasn't sure what was worse, being innocent in jail or being guilty and free. She stared again at the window, hoping the man in the brown shirt would return, that someone else might see him this time. But the road remained empty. She leaned her head back against the wall. The night air was thick and warm. Her mind raced with questions. Why would they bring me here when the real thief walks free? Why do they not see what I saw? In the corner of the room, an old radio crackled. The faint voice of a newsreader spoke about corruption, about people losing faith in justice. Adana listened, her lips tightening. She understood those words now more than ever. Outside, footsteps passed again, slow, cautious steps. Adana looked up, her eyes sharp. She saw a shadow pause near the window just for a second. Then it disappeared. "Someone's out there," she whispered. No one answered. Adana stood again, walking closer to the bars of the small window. She looked out carefully. The street lamp outside flickered weakly, lighting the ground in patches. And then, near the edge of the light, she saw it, a black bag lying by the gutter. Her heart leapt. Was the same one. She turned toward the officers again. "The bag," she said loudly. "It's outside." But once again they ignored her. One waved his hand lazily. "Sit down, woman. You're seeing things." Defeated, she sat back down. But inside her heart, something shifted. She realized that the police weren't looking for truth, they were looking for someone to blame. She promised herself quietly, "If they won't find the truth, I will." Through the window, the night deepened. The market was quiet now, and only the sound of the wind filled the air. Adana closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She had been taken as a suspect, but in that moment she made a silent vow, to find the proof that would free her, no matter what it took. The officers laughed behind their desks, unaware that the woman they mocked had already begun to see more clearly than all of them. Because while they underestimated her, Adana had started to understand something they hadn't. Sometimes the truth doesn't hide, it waits for brave eyes to notice it. And hers had already seen enough to change everything. The evening sun dipped behind the rooftops of Ijora, painting the streets in shades of gold and deep orange. The police station was quieter now. Most of the officers sat outside, drinking tea and talking about football, ignoring the woman still sitting silently inside, Adana. Her sewing basket rested beside her, untouched since morning. The room smelled of stale air and disappointment. The door creaked open. A young constable named Chaik walked in, his uniform slightly wrinkled from a long day. He was new to the force, humble, alert, and unlike the others, he still believed that being a policeman meant serving truth. He looked around the room, then noticed Adana sitting by the wall, her face calm but tired. "Adana?" he said softly. She looked up in surprise. "Chaik." He smiled faintly. "I knew it was you when I heard the name. I bought a shirt from you last month. The one with blue stitching." Despite her worry, Adana smiled a little. "Yes, I remember. You said you'd pay me later." Chaik chuckled quietly. "And I did. That's how I know you're honest." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, I don't believe you did this. Tell me exactly what happened." Adana hesitated, glancing at the open door. "They don't like it when I speak," she whispered. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll listen." She took a slow breath and told him everything, how she'd been near the market when the robbery happened, how she saw a man in a brown shirt running with a black bag, and how she saw him again through the window after she was arrested. Chaik nodded, his eyes narrowing in thought. "The man in the brown shirt?" he repeated. "Do you remember where he ran?" "Toward the yam seller's lane," she said. "Near the river bank. That was all he needed." Chaik straightened his cap. "Wait here," he said. "I'll check it myself." The senior officer, sitting at the desk nearby, laughed. "Where are you going, constable? Don't waste your time chasing ghosts." Chaik saluted quickly. "Just checking the area, sir." "Suit yourself," the officer said with a smirk. "Maybe you'll find a magic thief." Ignoring the laughter, Chaik stepped out into the cooling night. The streets of Ijora were dimly lit by a few weak lanterns. Vendors were packing up, children were chasing each other, and the market smelled of roasted corn and wet earth. He followed Adana's directions carefully, passing the yam stalls, the cobbler's corner, and the old tree that leaned over the road like an old guardian. When he reached the riverbank, the world was quiet except for the chirping of crickets. The river reflected the moonlight like a sheet of broken glass. Chaik scanned the area, piles of wooden crates, baskets left behind by traders, and a few scattered fruits on the ground. Then something caught his eye. Behind a fruit stall, half buried under dry leaves, was a small black bag. He walked closer, his heart beating faster. The bag was dusty, but it looked new, too new to be left there long. He crouched down, picked it up, and slowly opened it. Inside were gold earrings, a folded scarf embroidered with silver thread, and neatly wrapped bundles of cash. The exact items reported stolen from the mayor's wife. Chaik's eyes widened. "She was right," he whispered. He looked around quickly, but no one was there. The thief must have hidden it here to return later. Without wasting time, he zipped the bag shut and ran back toward the station, his boots pounding against the ground. The night wind followed him, carrying dust and whispers. When he burst into the station, the officers looked up in surprise. His chest rose and fell as he held out the bag. "I found it," he said, breathing hard. "By the riverbank. Behind a fruit stall, exactly where she said." For a few seconds no one spoke. Then one officer stood up slowly, his face pale. That's the mayor's wife's bag." The senior officer frowned. "How do you know it's the same one?" Chike opened it and showed the contents, the jewelry, the scarf, the money, all untouched. "Because her daughter described it when she came here," he said firmly. Adana was telling the truth. Silence filled the room. The same men who had mocked her earlier now stared at the bag as if it carried shame instead of gold. The senior officer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, it seems we may have been mistaken." "Mistaken?" Chike's voice was calm but steady. "You arrested an innocent woman without proof. She told you what she saw, but you laughed." The room grew tense. The senior officer's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Adana, still sitting by the wall, looked up as Chike approached her. Their eyes met, hers filled with relief, his with quiet respect. He placed the bag on the table. "You were right," he said softly. "We caught the wrong person." She blinked slowly as if waking from a bad dream. "You believed me," she whispered. "I saw truth in your eyes," Chike said. "And truth doesn't hide for long." The officers avoided her gaze. One of them finally walked over and unlocked her handcuffs. "You're free to go, madam," he said quietly. Adana stood slowly, rubbing her wrists. She didn't shout or cry. She simply looked around the room, the same room where she had been judged, mocked, and ignored. Then she turned to Chike and smiled. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "Justice needed eyes that could see. You gave me the path." As she stepped out of the station, the air outside felt cooler, lighter. The stars had come out, bright and endless over Ijora. The town was still awake, the sound of laughter from distant food stalls, the beat of drums somewhere far away. Chike watched her go, feeling a quiet pride. He knew her name would stay in his heart forever, not as a suspect, but as the woman who taught him that truth doesn't always wear a uniform. Inside the station, the senior officer sat back heavily, rubbing his forehead. "A tailor," he muttered. "We were shown the truth by a tailor." Chike looked at him calmly. "Sometimes, sir," he said, "the best detectives aren't the ones with badges. They're the ones with open eyes." The old fan creaked again. The room fell silent. And outside, the sound of Adana's footsteps faded into the night, the steps of a woman who had been underestimated but never defeated. The morning sun rose gently over Ijora, washing the streets in soft gold. The marketplace slowly came alive again, traders setting up their stalls, children running barefoot, and the smell of roasted maize filling the air. But at the police station, a different kind of morning waited. Inside, the air was heavy with silence. The officers, who had been loud and confident the day before, now stood awkwardly in their seats. On the wooden bench near the wall sat Adana, still calm, her sewing basket beside her. She looked tired, but there was no anger in her eyes, only quiet strength. The door opened and the police chief entered. He was an older man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of human pride. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Madam Adana," he said slowly, his voice low and serious. "You are free to go. We made a mistake." The other officers shifted uneasily. Some looked at the floor, others pretended to arrange papers. None of them could meet her gaze. The chief continued, "The constable, Chike, found the real thief's bag. You were right from the beginning. We owe you an apology." Adana stood quietly, her wrapper neat and her back straight. "You do not owe me words," she said softly. "You owe yourselves better eyes." Her voice wasn't angry, but it carried weight. It filled the room with something heavier than scolding, truth. The kind of truth that makes proud men bow their heads. The chief nodded slowly. "You speak wisely," he said. "Sometimes when people look with anger they stop seeing with sense." Adana gave a small smile. "Anger is loud," she said, "but truth is quiet. Only those who listen can hear it." No one spoke after that. Chike, standing near the door, gave her a small nod of respect. She nodded back, her eyes kind. Then she picked up her basket and walked toward the exit. Her steps were slow but sure, like someone walking out of a dark room into light. Outside, the town was waiting. Word had spread faster than fire in dry grass. The people of Ijora had already gathered near the police station, traders, children, elders, and the mayor's wife herself. They wanted to see the woman the police had wrongly accused. When Adana stepped out, the crowd fell silent for a moment. Then one by one people began to smile, clap, and cheer. The market women waved their hands in the air. "Adana," one shouted. "Our tailor has returned." A group of children ran forward, holding flowers they had picked by the roadside. They placed them at her feet. "You are brave, Mama Adana," one little girl said shyly. Adana bent down and touched the girl's head gently. "Bravery is not loud, my child," she said. "It is just standing when the world says sit." The mayor's wife stepped forward, holding a small parcel wrapped in silk. Her face was humble now, not proud like before. "I am sorry," she said. "I judged you wrongly. Please accept this as a sign of peace." Adana looked at the parcel, then shook her head gently. "Keep your gift," she said kindly. "What I need is not gold or cloth. I need people to see truth before they shout lies." The crowd murmured in agreement. The mayor's wife lowered her eyes, ashamed but grateful. As Adana walked through the marketplace, the people followed her with love and admiration. The place that had once whispered against her now sang her name. Even the old drummers started to play softly as she passed, their rhythms light and joyful. But Adana didn't let pride fill her heart. She smiled at everyone, greeted them with warmth, and continued walking toward her small tailor's shop at the end of the lane. Her shop was simple, just a wooden table, a few rolls of fabric, and her old sewing machine. Dust had settled on it since her arrest. She ran her fingers gently across the machine, feeling the cool metal beneath her skin. "This is where I belong," she whispered. She sat down, adjusted her stool, and began to sew. The soft rhythm of the needle filled the air again, tack tack tack, like the sound of peace returning. Her hands were steady, her stitches perfect, her heart light. Outside, people stopped by to greet her. "Adana, we are happy you are home," said the yam seller. "God bless you, Adana," said the old fishmonger. Adana smiled at them all. "Thank you," she said. "The truth has its own way of walking home." As the day went on, the market returned to its usual rhythm. But something was different now. There was a sense of respect in the air, a reminder that even the quiet ones could carry strength greater than power. Later that afternoon, Chaik passed by her shop. He leaned on the doorframe and watched her sew for a moment. "You're back at work already?" he asked with a small smile. Adana looked up. "Work is my peace," she said. "When I stitch, the world feels right again." Chaik nodded. "You've taught the station a lesson," he said. "Even the chief said we must learn to look before we judge." Adana smiled faintly. "Then the world has gained a little more sense," she said. Chaik laughed softly. "And all because of a tailor." She chuckled too. "A tailor sees what others don't," she said. "We mend what is torn. Even truth can be stitched back together." They shared a quiet moment of understanding before Chaik tipped his hat and walked away. As the sun began to set, the light turned warm and soft, spilling through the small window of her shop. Adana paused for a moment, looking outside. The marketplace that had once been full of whispers was now full of greetings and laughter. The same people who had doubted her now waved as they passed. She didn't hold bitterness. She didn't need to. The truth had spoken for her, and that was enough. That evening, as she locked her shop and walked home, she thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the doubt, the kindness of Chaik, and the humility of those who had once judged her. She smiled to herself and whispered, "Justice is not about power. It is about eyes that choose to see." And with that, she disappeared down the narrow road, her figure outlined by the last light of the day, a quiet woman, once underestimated, now walking with the calm strength of someone who had proven the world wrong. That night, Ijora slept in peace. But for many, the story of Adana became a lesson told over fires and dinners, a reminder that truth is like the dawn. No matter how long the night lasts, it always finds its way back to light. A week passed in Ijora, and life began to move slowly back to normal. The marketplace buzzed again with voices and laughter, but beneath it all, there was still talk of one woman, Adana, the tailor. Her story had become the center of every conversation. Some told it in the morning over tea, others whispered it at night by lantern light. Everyone had something to say about the woman the police once underestimated. Then one bright afternoon the news broke: the real thief had been caught. It happened when the young constable Chaik was patrolling near the edge of town. He noticed a man trying to sell jewelry behind an old warehouse. When he stepped closer, he saw the same brown shirt torn at the sleeve, and the same nervous look that Adana had described. Chaik called for help, and within minutes the thief was surrounded and arrested. Word spread like wildfire. The mayor himself came to the police station to see the man who had caused so much trouble. And when they confirmed that the stolen money and items matched what had gone missing, the truth was finally clear. Adana had been innocent all along. That evening the people of Ijora gathered at the town square. The air was filled with music, laughter, and relief. Even the police officers who had once doubted her stood quietly, their faces filled with regret and respect. The chief of police called Adana to the stage and handed her a certificate of appreciation. "We owe you more than an apology," he said loudly so all could hear. "You saw what we could not. You reminded us that true justice begins with patience, and eyes that are willing to see." The crowd cheered. Children clapped. Old women ululated. And Adana, standing with her sewing basket by her feet, smiled humbly. "I am only a tailor," she said softly. "I fix what is torn." That day truth was torn, and I only helped sew it back together. The crowd fell silent, moved by her words. Even the chief bowed his head. After that day things changed in Ijora. The police no longer rushed to judgment. They began to think before they accused and listen before they shouted. Adana's calm wisdom had left its mark on them. One morning Chaik came to visit her small shop. She was sitting by her sewing machine, patching a torn school uniform. "Adana," he said, smiling, "the chief wants you to visit the station again. He says we need your eyes." Adana laughed lightly. "My eyes?" "Yes," Chaik replied. "We have a case that confuses everyone. He says you see what others miss." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Very well," she said. "But remember, Chaik, I don't see with my eyes alone. I see with patience." That day she went with him to the station. She didn't act like a hero. She didn't boast. She simply listened to the officers, asked quiet questions and observed carefully. Within minutes she noticed a clue everyone else had ignored, a small footprint near a window that told a story none of the officers had seen. The chief smiled in amazement. "You are not just a tailor, Adana," he said. "You are a teacher." Adana shook her head. "No," she replied gently. "I am a student of silence. Silence teaches more than noise." From that day on she became a quiet advisor to the police. They called her Mama Adana, the woman with clear eyes. Whenever a case was difficult they would say, "Let's ask the tailor, she sees truth in threads." Time passed. The seasons turned. Adana grew older, but her hands never lost their steadiness. She continued her tailoring, stitching clothes for children, fixing old dresses and helping neighbors. But people came to her not only for clothes, they came for advice. They would sit by her door and ask, "Mama Adana, what should I do?" And she would listen before speaking, her words always simple, always kind. Years went by and her story spread far beyond Ijora. Travelers from other towns came to meet her. Some wanted to thank her for teaching the police humility. Others wanted to learn how to see the world the way she did, with quietness and patience. Adana never asked for fame or riches. When people praised her, she only smiled and said, "A needle is small, but it mends big tears. Never think small things have no power." She continued to live in her modest home behind the market. Every morning she would open her window, breathe in the fresh air, and whisper a short prayer of gratitude. Then she would sit at her machine, the steady rhythm of the needle keeping her company as the town came alive around her. Sometimes children would gather outside her shop to hear her tell stories. They loved listening to her calm voice. One day a little girl asked, "Mama Adana, is it true you helped the police catch a thief?" Adana smiled. "No," she said softly. "I didn't catch a thief. I just helped the truth find its way home." The children looked amazed. They always loved how she spoke in simple words that carried deep meaning. And when they left, they repeated her sayings to each other, turning her lessons into songs and games. One of her sayings became especially famous across Ijora. It was painted on the wall outside her shop by a local artist. Read, "Don't underestimate the quiet, their silence often holds the sharpest eyes." As years passed, that quote became something of a proverb. Teachers repeated it in classrooms. Parents said it to their children. Even the police used it during training. It reminded everyone that wisdom does not always shout, sometimes it whispers. When Adana grew old, her hair turned silver, but her eyes remained bright. She still sat by her sewing machine, still watched people kindly, and still offered advice when asked. And though the town had changed, new roads, new shops, new faces, everyone still knew her name. Whenever a young officer solved a case with patience, the elders would smile and say, "That one must have learned from Adana." One warm evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in orange and gold, Adana closed her shop and sat quietly outside. She watched the children play, the women laugh, and the men return from work. She felt peace in her heart, the kind that comes when truth and goodness walk together. She whispered to herself, "I was once accused. But now I am remembered, not for fighting but for seeing." A gentle wind passed, lifting the corner of her wrapper. Somewhere, in the distance, the sound of laughter rose from the market. And in that laughter, the story of Adana lived on. The quiet tailor who saw the truth when others could not, who taught her town that calmness is stronger than pride, and that silence, when guided by truth, can speak louder than any voice.